Welcome. I'm very happy to see so many people here tonight, but also so many people that we all know among each other, because we have Yair Hirschfeld as a guest who has been so influential for many of us in the debate about the Middle East and coexistence. As you can see, we are coexisting also on this panel here tonight, because Yair said it's nice if I have a conversation with him and we are now stage without his co-author, who we are very lucky or happy that you can be here. Jackson Al-Khoury de Concini came with us to also participate immediately in the discussion. I tried to explain to Yair that we want to hear from him the beginnings also, when you were sort of, when we were all thinking that there might be a hope for peace. But it makes, of course, much more sense to have your two very close collaborators here on stage with us. On my left, John Ging, who, as Sabine said, was very involved also in Middle Eastern everything, actually, politics, but also in humanitarian aid. He was the head of UNRWA in Gaza from 2005 to 2012. And then afterwards ran basically the entire humanitarian aid program for the UN. So I'm very, very glad that we have such a strong panel tonight. But let me turn to Yair first. Yair, wir könnten eigentlich auf Deutsch sprechen, gell?
Ich will am Anfang auf Deutsch sprechen, aber dann auf Englisch gehen. Ich wollte eine kurze Geschichte erzählen. Ich bin in Wien aufgewachsen. Und ich will eine Geschichte erzählen, als ich 18 Jahre alt war. Ich war im Juni 62 18 Jahre alt. Und im Juni 62 ist Eichmann in Israel exekutiert worden. Und dann gab es antisemitische Aktivitäten überall in Europa. Und ich war Siemengli, ich war Roschken im Shomer-HaTziyah in Wien und fühlte mich verantwortlich mit anderen für die 120 Kinder, die dort waren. Und wir sind die jüdische junge Führung, 17, 18, 19-Jährigen, sind nach Israel berufen worden, um Selbstverteidigung zu lernen. Es war nicht furchtbar ernst in Israel, aber wie wir zurückgekommen sind, begann es sehr ernst. Und ich bin vielleicht eine Woche nachdem ich zurückgekommen bin, kriege ich ein Telefongespräch von Josi Holobeck, von deinem Vater. Und er ruft mich an und sagt mir, Peter, ich habe dir zwei Sachen zu sagen. Das erste, mach keine Spassetteln. Mach nichts Dummes. Er scheint genau gewusst zu haben, was wir gemacht haben. Und das zweite, the second message, die zweite Nachricht war, was immer du willst, was immer du brauchst, um am Shomer-HaTziyah die Jugendbewegung zu schützen, wenn du A willst, gebe ich dir A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Du hast meine Telefonnummer, 82 13 35, stimmt das? No question that I still remember, La Rochegasse 14. Und du kannst, wann immer du willst, 24 Stunden am Tag mich anrufen oder zu mir kommen. Und was immer du fragen willst, werde ich das Doppelte und das Vielfache machen. Das war eine der Aktivitäten, die wir hatten. Wir hatten große Sicherheit von der österreichischen Regierung, von Polizeipräsidenten, aber von allem, was er darstellte. Und vielen Dank für dich. No, I admired Holobeck for, I don't have to tell you what a hero he was in World War II. And thank you very much for this. And now, wir machten drei andere Sachen. Das nächste war, dass wir um Selbstverteidigung uns gekümmert haben. Wir haben im Hakoach einen Club für Judo und einen Club für Krav Maga organisiert. Und mir wurde heute gesagt, dass die Judomeister in Österreich sind von Hakoach. So I came.
The beginning.
The beginning. Naja, ich habe nicht viel nachher gemacht. Oder nichts. Das dritte war, dass wir österreichische Jugendliche hatten, die unser Alter waren, die von Nazi-Eltern waren und die mit uns daran gearbeitet haben, zu sehen, was die rechten Gruppen alles machen. Und wir hatten ein kind of intelligencing, to know, was der RFS macht, der Turnerverband und all diese wunderbaren Gruppen. Und das vierte, was wir machen, war dann, dass zu gleicher Zeit hat Heinz Fischer und Ferdinand Latziner, den ich gerade gesehen habe, haben den antifaschistischen Kampf begonnen, mit Tara Borodajkovic-Demonstrationen und das. Und wenn Sie mich fragen, warum ich das Buch geschrieben habe, das Buch ist ein Versuch zu erklären, warum diese vierfache Zusammenarbeit von gemeinsamen Sicherheitsdenken, gemeinsamer antifaschistischer Arbeit, gemeinsamer Kooperation in all diesen Sachen, warum das daneben gegangen ist und wie wir das wieder aufbauen können. Und das Buch, das ich geschrieben habe, ist obviously my narrative about what happened. And that may take me.
Thank you for switching into English, because we promised people it would be in English. I know that most of you speak German, of course, but some don't. So it's good if we go back to English as the language for tonight, also for John probably, and for Jackson, who don't understand a word we say otherwise. So Yair Hirschfeld, everyone knows it, you are one of the architects of the Oslo Accords. When you describe this in this book, and it's also well known that at the beginning of the 90s, it was still not a given that Palestinians and Israelis could meet, and especially not in official functions. So it was a kind of good idea to ask academics and people who were not sitting in the ministry as the first, as the beginning of talks. So how, Yair, can you tell us why you got involved in the rather crazy idea to make peace between Israelis and Palestinians in the first place?
I want to be very clear. The peace process started with Kreisky in 1970-71. I've got here the activities, and George and Georg Lenke sitting here. And in 1971, the Socialist International...
Because it's so beautiful.
Yeah, I bought this for you.
Yair brought us the protocol from 1970. Georg, he showed you this.
They started in 71, and the Kreisky activities were part of a coordination mainly of three leaders, Kreisky, Olof Palme, and Willy Brandt. And there were ups and downs. But Kreisky had a major role in preparing the Camp David Accords. He invited Shimon Peres twice to Salzburg together with President Sadat in 1978, before the negotiations, which had an enormous impact on the Israeli public. There were these Sartawi talks which failed, but were in an important phase. And then there was the Camp David Accords were signed, which is the basis for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. And then in February 1979, there was a little happening in Iran. A guy called Ayatollah Khomeini, who you might have heard of, took power. And I was asked by the Austrian TV to discuss it because my field is Iran in background. And Bruno Kreisky saw me, and Bruno Kreisky asked to meet me. And the Oslo process doesn't start in Oslo, but the discussions Kreisky and I had led in September 1980 to this, that I brought a Palestinian delegation, Palestinian delegation from the West Bank and Gaza, with supporters from the PLO and supporters from Jordan together to Vienna. And the process started that from 3rd or 4th of September onward, until 1991, we in Israel, the group I worked with, which included Shimon Peres and Yossi Beilin and others too, we built a confident relationship with the Palestinian leadership. We went through trust building, we went through network building, we went through policy planning together, the policy planning became very serious when Faisal Hosseini came out of prison in January 1988. And then there were the Baker proposals. We created the concept for negotiations. In 1991, there was the Madrid conference. In the Madrid conference, I was with the Palestinian delegation, and we had enough trust. We have built enough trust that the Palestinians gave me all their negotiating papers. They gave me all their negotiating papers, and the negotiating papers they gave me described the Israeli position, and they described the Palestinian position, and made it possible for me to prepare a paper of 3 different models of negotiations, which said, how do you cut the bullshit, forgive me, how do you cut the thing between them, and how do you reach an agreement? There was one model that the Palestinians didn't like, there was one model that the Israelis didn't like, and there was one model that both sides said we can live with it, which is the Oslo model of graduation. And we had all the papers there, and then there was some guy, Tari Larsen, who wanted to invite us. We came to Oslo. They paid the flight tickets. They had no idea what we were discussing. They were dependent on what we were told them. They were very supportive. They helped us in many different ways. They had nothing to do with the negotiations. They were what you call facilitators and not mediators. All the narratives speaking about it are built on lies. And I must say that it is not really forgivable. I think it is essential to establish Kreisky's role and to establish the role of the Socialist International and understand that it was a process that started long before September 1993.
Yes, no, absolutely. Of course, here in Kreisky Forum, everyone's aware also of the role that Kreisky played, and also I actually wrote a book about Issam Satawi and these talks that were all over Europe, also especially in Paris. But in the sense that your role as bringing together people, because the Palestinian delegation officially, I was sitting in '93 in Washington with Saeb Erekat in his hotel room after he realized that there were secret negotiations that actually came to a result, and they were very upset, the official delegation of the Palestinians. And while you had sort of done a secret track track 2 negotiations, basically. So you might say that Oslo was not the official host, but rather sort of the facilitator. But there was something very, very special about the way you brought together this group of people that then also led to an agreement on, a head forward with a recognition of the PLO and of Israel.
Yes.
So tell us about this. What was sort of the crucial moment when you felt, okay, there is a movement forward?
I'll tell you the crucial moment that Abu Allah told me.
Yeah.
And there is somewhere my wife sitting.
Yeah, there she is.
And at the special moment, we prepared the concept. I concluded an agreement with no right to do so in March with Abu Allah, who was wonderful. And then Peres threw me out of the closet for the reason doesn't matter. But then everything was restarted, and I knew that we would move from the unofficial track 2 thing to official negotiations. And the demand was for Abu Allah to bring the Palestinian delegation back to Washington. And he delivered everything I demanded, everything. And the agreement was that he goes to Oslo, and I come to it. And he's going to Oslo, he's waiting in Oslo, and I get the order from Paris, you cannot go there. And I tell this Madame Ruth, and tell her, what would you do? He says, this is madness. He will go home like a beaten dog. And Arafat will throw him out of the window. Academics cheated you. And we said, what will we do? So I went to Shimon Peres and said, I want from you the right to go to Oslo and tell Abu Allah, I'm not coming to Oslo because these and these conditions. But you have to understand that the next step is that official negotiations with you are going to start. For Abu Allah, this was the decisive moment. For us, there were many decisive moments.
Well, for you on the Israeli side, you needed at a certain point a step to the political level. That's when Uri Savir sort of was contacted and brought in.
And Joel Singer came in.
And how difficult was it to convince Peres to then continue with these talks, sort of unofficially informing Rabin not too much, not too early? I mean, that must have been such a really nail-biting experience, not to know if they would turn it totally down.
You know, Peres was easy to convince. Peres gave me the means to make a success. What was the means? At the third meeting in Oslo, I was given the order, and a very important one, it was a decisive one, to ask Abu Allah, please ask Mr. Arafat, when does he want to return to Gaza? From that moment on, Abu Allah had to deliver the goods, because Arafat wanted to come back. The difficulty was to convince Rabin. Joel Singer was Rabin's man, Uri Savir was Peres' man. So Joel Singer came from Washington to Jerusalem, and I was given 15 minutes to explain what happened in the last 2.5 years to convince Joel Singer to do it. And I said one simple thing. I would say one simple thing. The major issues that are at stake are solvable because we're going gradually. Because we're going gradually, the major issue was who remains, is that Israel maintains basically sovereignty there, while there's empowerment. We had I established five principles, and I'm adding today 2. But I established 5 principles that were the basis of the Oslo process. Number 1, gradual. You cannot go all in once. Number 2, Palestinian empowerment. The Palestinians, if you want a 2-state solution, the Palestinians must build themselves the capacity to do it. It's not an agreement, it's not a thing. Palestinian empowerment. Number 3, you need security cooperation. Number 4, you have to embed it in regional cooperation. Number 5, you need what we call people-to-people activities. We can call it reconciliation, but a lot of working together many things. I wrote Annex 3 and Annex 4 of the DOP that has all the people-to-people things. And these 5 principles are true today, by the way. And I can tell you how we want to work on them today. There are 2 other principles. One principle which we lacked and was a disaster we lacked. You cannot ignore the religious people. In both societies, religion and tradition is very, very strong. And we not only ignore them, but we knowingly sideline them. I can explain why, but not necessary. And the second one, you want to do it as inclusive as possible. You want to include as much as possible and create as much supportive also from former opponents.
But the first point you made that it was crucial to start in a gradual process. So that has big advantages, this concept. It also has big disadvantages. A lot of people said at the time, okay, this is an option for hope and an option for developing peace. And a lot of people already then said, this will not work because it's not based on an equal footing between Israel and Palestine, but about Israel keeping sovereignty over the Palestinians. If you look back on this now, do you think that it was still necessary to start with the gradual process, or did that already have the failure of the process within the first step?
No. Everything or nothing process never worked, never could work. It has the gradual process disadvantages. The gradual process makes it possible for opponents to do all kind of things. There's other disadvantages. But the everything or nothing process doesn't work. So the challenge is you have to address the difficulties of a gradual process, and we are now thinking of it and working on it. But you cannot, you can't do it otherwise. Now on the equal standing, with all due respect, there is a double asymmetry, and don't forget the double asymmetry. The one asymmetry is that we are stronger than the Palestinians. But the other asymmetry is that the Palestinians can have, since 1936, mobilized the entire world, the region. It was a conflict until 1936 between the two communities. In 1936, Haj Amin al-Husseini said, let's all the Arab states come in. All Arab states started a war against us. All Arab states invaded Palestine against the UN resolution. The United Nations didn't care about their own resolution, the Americans not for power reasons. Our demand was in Lausanne on in May 1949, respect UN resolutions and the fact that there's a UN charter that says that states do not kill each other and don't threaten each other and don't do war with other but negotiate with other. And we were told this is true for the others, but for power relations this is not true for Israel. And the Israeli official position in Lausanne, in the peace conference in Lausanne, was we want the implementation of the two-state solution as decided, and the right of self-determination for the Palestinian people. Now, Haj Amin Husseini was an enemy to the West, so the West didn't want it. So, you know, you pay a price for making policies that are very difficult. In the end, Haj Amin Husseini was a supporter of Hitler. He did, if he wanted or not, he did raise Muslim units to kill Jews. Now, this doesn't mean we don't have to speak to them. It doesn't mean that we don't have to find a reconciliation. But this asymmetry is not as simple as you put it.
No, it's true that it's a very, as we know, a very complex conflict. I was just wondering, if you look at it now, I'm sure you did, you know, you needed to find a point to start with and a point of compromise that would have made possible for both Israelis and Palestinians to stay in the room. And you did achieve that also. So we were all very hopeful. I was in Jerusalem, we were all celebrating, Palestinians, Israelis, everyone was sort of at that moment hoping that it would lead to peace. But we saw also how quickly, also the other points that you mentioned, how easy it was for the enemies of the agreement, of the Oslo Accords, to undermine everything that we would have needed for a comprehensive peace agreement to come out of the Oslo Accord. So you had immediately terror attacks. You had also very, you know, on both sides, in the sense that, you know, a lot of people died on the Palestinian side, on the Israeli side, which immediately undermined this little bit of hope that people had to go about it. So what point on did you feel that all your achievement was being washed out by the violence and the inability to look beyond the difficulties towards a common goal?
I'll give you a little bit a too optimistic answer. I think there are two major achievements that we have not lost. There is strong, big numbers of Israelis, big numbers of Palestinians who have built over the last 45 years trust with each other. And this is extremely important today. This is an asset that we have developed. We'll speak more tomorrow about it in the Wirtschaftsinstitut, more in details than I can say here. And we are working together on getting out of the mess. The second achievement is that we have achieved what was you say the beginning, the creation of a Palestinian self-government. Now, there have been many mistakes, if you ask me what was the first major mistake, Rabin wanted to build a partnership with Arafat. And I met Arafat several times. I'm speaking about Arafat, the bad, the ugly, the bad, and the good. And I can tell you why. Arafat, the ugly, was terror. And it took him time to understand that it undermines himself. It was too late when he understood. He understood it in March 1996. In March 1996, he phoned me. He phoned others to tell Shimon Peres we'll work together on security all the way, and it was too late. So terror was the ugly thing. The bad part of Arafat, and probably as bad as it was worse, not worse, was bad enough, that he was a revolutionary, not a state builder. He did everything to undermine any orderly state building. I can give you plenty of examples of that. I don't know if we have time. And I think he was also the good. I believe that there was a possibility to come to not to a final agreement. That never. He told me there was a meeting with Latzina and what's the name, Kahane, Patricia Kahane, where we went to see Arafat, and Arafat gave all niceties to Patricia. Our father was wonderful. And then he turned to me. This is September 1995. We were negotiating the Berlin-Abu Mazen agreement, which we concluded, but Abbas agreed and then withdrew. And Arafat told me, Yair, don't go for it. It won't work. It works only gradually. It doesn't work otherwise. And Arafat came out sometimes with very constructive ideas. Why do I say this?
Because you were explaining that Arafat was the
no,
good,
when it
bad,
went
and the
bad,
ugly.
when it went bad, when it was everything or nothing. Barack and Clinton went for everything or nothing. And when it went for everything or nothing, the answer was nothing.
But because you said that with Arafat he understood too late that violence involved in this whole negotiation process, it was too late to pull back from the brink. But on the Israeli side you had the two. How would you characterize Rabin in his way, how he dealt with negotiating on the one hand, on the other hand? I remember, for example, after the massacre of Baruch Goldstein, when he killed praying people in Hebron, and afterwards the settlers were not taken out of Hebron. That was a moment where we all had the feeling, whoa, sort of, the Palestinians were locked down, the Israeli settlers could stay in Kiryat Arba and in Hebron, in a Palestinian city. They were not sort of. And it was this balance where we always thought, like, will he have the courage to say, we need to save this peace chance by also making clear who the bad and the good ones are on the Israeli side?
I'll answer you.
Yeah.
When this terrible thing happened, Ron Pundak and I were sent to discuss with Mahel Kurt, who was close to Arafat, what to do. And we came back to Shimon Peres, and we told Peres, take them out not of Kiryat Arba, but of the center of Hebron. And Peres agreed with us. And then he went to Rabin, and Rabin, I'm not sure, but Rabin asked Ephraim Sneh, who is one of us. I'm now working with Ephraim together hand in hand. Rabin asked Ephraim Sneh if he should do it. And Ephraim Sneh told Rabin, there will be a bloodbath. There will be a bloodbath, don't do it. And then they did this thing. So there are situations like this. And we have mutual. There was before in November '94. In November '94 there was a what shall we call it? There was a Hamas revolt against Arafat, and there were some 20 people killed. We were sent. Ron and I were sent to Gaza. They got us out and us and gave us good food in a nice fish restaurant. And Nabil Shah told us all kinds of stories in order to keep us there. And the outcome was that Arafat reached an understanding with Hamas. You don't go against me, but I will tolerate what you can do. And Rabin's saying that I will deal with terror if there is no process, and I will negotiate if there's no terror, I believe was a big mistake.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects of these years directly around that time when we thought there was an option for peace, and then it failed. And by '96, when Netanyahu was elected, it was quite clear that he would not be the one who would take the measures for peace and the painful compromises to reach peace.
I disagree with you.
Please.
I disagree with you. I think that Netanyahu, you have to look at Netanyahu at a strategic mind, at a political mind, and a personal mind. And there are three different personalities. On a strategic mind, Netanyahu is a two-state man. And he agreed, if you go and invite here at Hossein Ara, Hossein Ara, who was the real negotiator, more than Saib Barakat, Hossein Ara, who lives in London together with Ahmed Khalidi, they will tell you that Hussein had hundreds of hours with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu wanted a two-state solution under his conditions. They agreed in 2014 to the Kerry, in the Kerry initiative, to a framework agreement, which Obama didn't say that it's a masterpiece. And Netanyahu accepted it, and Mr. Abbas rejected it. And the international community gave a lot of support for Mr. Abbas for rejecting it, and punished Netanyahu for other reasons which he deserved on that. And until 2014, Netanyahu, he signed the Hebron Protocol. He signed the Wye River Agreement. And he started to implement them. Not that I say I'm in big love. I haven't forgotten that Netanyahu was standing on the roof with it. So my love for him is not there. But Netanyahu, until 2014, wanted a two-state. From 2014 onward, the cry was, which is Hamas הוא נכס והרשות היא on. The Hamas is a asset, and the PA is a liability, which is a disaster. We try to fight against.
As we can see today.
What?
It is a disaster, as we can see today, because Hamas became so strong.
So we are paying the price.
Yeah. But you were sort of so closely involved throughout all the political negotiations, but also, which I thought was very interesting, what you also describe in the book, in the security thinking. And what you said about how Ariel Sharon withdrew unilaterally the settlements, Israeli settlements from Gaza in 2005, that there was, it seemed sometimes easier for the security establishment to work together than for political leaders to find an agreement. Can you elaborate a little bit on this? Because I sometimes think when we look at the war also today, that there is still a lot of cooperation that is actually possible, and negotiations that go on about things, and also sometimes at least a humanitarian pause. But is it easier for warlords to talk about security than about peace?
Don't tell security warlords. They have a job, and sometimes they're very serious and very good people. Now, first of all, I want to tell you that when Sharon discussed the unilateral thing, he proposed to the Americans to take all the 15 settlements out of the mountain ridge, would have been wonderful. And the Americans said, no, this is too much. So, we'll come to the settlement issue, there's something to do. So sometimes we are misled by the international community, and I'll give you more on that. We organized security cooperation between Amnon Lipri and Shachak, and the Palestinian counterpart. And Amnon Lipkin-Shachar had nominated the Minister of Defense, and therefore they could go between, and they coordinated things. And Amnon Lipkin-Shachar was a wonderful man, so don't say he was a warlord. And he would have gone, he was a Feinschmecker, he didn't, but he was.
He was a Feinschmecker.
We did all the work for him at the end only. But security cooperation was possible. There could have been none far more. We negotiated at the time with Palestinian counterparts an agreement that the settlement real estate, and we had Peres's deputy prime minister, and Peres's deputy prime minister made then an official proposal that all the real estate should be handed over for economic development on the Palestinian side without getting paid. And we wanted to turn Gaza into major kind of Singapore. There were practical ideas that the Gush Katif would be a tourist center, and Austria should help develop the tourism. There were all the agriculture, the Danes and some others, and all of this was planned. We also suggested the path through Israel, the safe passage, and development in the West Bank. And the international community, Mr. Michael Wolfenson, who was a decent man, came out with the statement that this is against international law, because international law has not developed since '48, unlike law on women, for instance. And international law says that all the real estate that was built under occupation has to be destroyed. And he obliged the Israeli government to sign an agreement to destroy all this over $4 billion things. And instead of turning development, construction, cooperation, economic move, and prosperity into a picture, he developed a picture of war, of rubbles, of destruction, only because some kind of idiots believe that international law is more important than any decency and any conflict. So we have something to, if we look at the narrative of what happened, I'm sure that you can come up with a lot of mistakes of the Israeli side, a lot of wrongdoings. You can come up with a lot of wrongdoings of the Palestinian side. But I can tell you, and if you don't get me there because I won't stop, I can come up with such a list of the wrongdoings of the international community with all the good things they have done. I live in a concept where I live with contradictions. In many ways, the international community did wonderful things. In many ways, they did terrible things. But you have to be aware of where they were counterproductive.
But you're very clear, sort of, that in the book and also in your writings, that the failed leadership on both sides of the conflict directly brought us to the situation that we are in now. It's also, you are also asking the international community to get involved and get sort of try to bring people together to some kind of settlement now for the next months, to end the war, to start reconstructing Gaza, and also to start thinking about the wider future of the region. And you do sort of say, with the help of the Gulf states, to bring in the Gulf states as they are already now, as a mediator or also as a constructive part of the conversation. But I wanted to ask you, before we bring in John and Jackson and also everyone here in the room, if you still have the hope that at this absolutely terrifying moment of the Middle Eastern situation, where we have Israel in a war in the south, Gaza terribly destroyed after 1 year, the events of October 7th, the attack of Hamas coming up now next week, already 1 year of this trauma on all sides, plus now this incredible war in the north, where even where you live is not safe at the moment of rocket outside of Haifa. So how how much hope is left?
The truth is there is quite a lot of hope. I'll try to say it from my perspective. This may be different than John. We have to deal with 4 different Palestinian positions. One position is there is a strong peace camp. They're the Abu Alas of this world. I can give you a lot of them. Dr. Mohammed Mustas of the world. There's the present Palestinian government, which is wonderful, which our experience is that we not only can work with them, as a rule, when there are most difficulties, they are far more creative in thinking than we are. And the most ways to break through, the most ideas mainly come from the other side, also for practical reasons. But, and we have to work with them. You have the second group, the Mahmoud Abbasis of this world, who is weak. And the very thing says no because he's weak. They don't want to add something to it. It's corrupt too. And then there's a third group of Palestinians, and I won't give you names, but very, very senior ones, and not a small group, who told me literally, Yair, we don't want a Palestinian state. If there's a Palestinian state, Israel will be on the top of the world, and everybody will give us shit. And if we negotiate and we don't come to an agreement, we Palestinians will be on the top of the world, the leadership, not the people, will be on the top of the world, and you Israelis will start to fight one against each other. We have to deal with this group. And there's the fourth group of Hamas. Now, part of what I'm telling the international community, that I can tell you when they supported the third and the fourth group instead of the first group and a little bit the second group. Now today we have a beginning where the European Union has made a very important plan to strengthen the Mohammed Mustafa government with money that saves their position until April, with 1 billion euros. And we can work with them, and they're wonderful people, and John may tell you more about that. We have Americans who are doing very, very important work. The United States Security Coordinator, which is a bigger group. This is also Dutch and Germans and French and American and the British. We have an international, the beginning of an international community. We have part of the international community Iran propagandists and supporters of concept of creeping genocide against Israel. But you have part of the international community has a clear understanding, and there's a lot, we'll speak more about this tomorrow, a clear understanding how to promote the Mohammed Mustafa people, our people. We have difficulties on our side too. And how to move forward. Now, the need for making it is more than it ever was. The only way to rebuild Gaza is you need the kleine cat of about $110, $120 billion. It's more than you and I have together.
I think we have a problem to come up with.
And the idea that this will come from donations is not out of this world. This has to come from real economic, political, security interests of the region. And if you look at the Saudi plan of 2030, 2040, 2050, if you look at the United Arab Emirates plan, they have a vested interest to make it happen. We are working on it. Our friends come from Cyprus, where some beginning was done there. The answer, there is hope.
Okay, but there's sort of the money probably to start something would probably be there. The question is if there's a political will. You mentioned the Palestinian leadership, different groups. I mean, we have a pretty radical Israeli government that doesn't look as if it's interested even in a ceasefire in Gaza after so many months. But shall we bring in...
Yes.
Short answer, yes. Good, thank you. Shall we bring in Jackson on this point? Jackson. So Jackson, as we said before, co-authored, wrote the book with Yair. But he also worked now in the last month in Lebanon, very important work with refugees, and he also will go in the near future back to Gaza, where he also worked. Tell us about the situation that you witnessed and where you think if there's any place for hope.
Quite a question. Can you all hear me all right? Okay. I'll start by saying that co-author is too kind of a title for the book. This is very much Dr. Hirschfeld's memoir. My job was actually to cut many pages of it. I was the co-deleter. But for more to be added in. And it really is quite a phenomenal testimony of the history of the peace process and many of its successes, but also many of its failures. And I think that it wasn't until I was in Gaza in January of this year that you really see the failures of the peace process. Every night we would be on the top of our guest house in Rafah, and we would be watching buildings being blown up in Khan Yunis. And that's when it becomes very clear that these negotiations have real consequences when they go well, but much more real consequences when they go poorly. It also brings to the question, after something like this, how could we ever sit at the same table? And it is a question that we have debated quite a lot, and one that I think I have less hope on after having been in Gaza about how we can bring people together, with the exception of my experience in Lebanon. So I wasn't in Lebanon last month. I probably will be going there next month with my medical organization, but it was when I was there previously, before I started working with Dr. Hirschfeld, that I saw maybe there is hope for interreligious peace building, and that if people-to-people organizations focus much more on the real religious ties that bring people together, there's a chance. This is, for context, the group I was working with was up north in Lebanon, working between Syrian refugees, Maronite Lebanese, and Shia Lebanese who had been living, Syrian refugees and then Shia Lebanese living in the north, on the real strength of interfaith Abrahamic people-to-people activities, and how that can form real ties when there's been decades and decades of bloodshed. So funny enough, it was Lebanon that made me more confident in the prospects of peace between, or at least with reconciliation on Gaza, but it will take many, many, many years.
Thank you for that. I think we need an extra talk on Lebanon and your work there. Let me turn to John. Maybe I give him the microphone. Because John, you have a very, very, very long and serious experience with working in Gaza in humanitarian aid and helping also a whole population to be funded by UNRWA, by the UN for long, long years. How do you see the situation now? You said you were just coming from Cyprus, from a conference that was dealing with also economic issues. Give us your analysis of the situation and where we can look for anything constructive.
Thank you. Thank you. And of course, as Jackson said, that question is just too big. But thank you for the opportunity, and it's a privilege to be here. My life has been an interesting journey, from the Irish Army to the Rwandan genocide for 2 years, to Bosnia under the leadership of Wolfgang, and then on to Kosovo and to Gaza for 5 years, where I lived there, and then to New York as the head of the operations, humanitarian operations, which took me to over 120 countries, from North Korea to Venezuela. And, for a guy from a small village in Ireland to have exposure to all of that is both a privilege and also generates a tremendous obligation. And the first thing I would say here this evening is people really need to listen to this man. Dr. Hirschfeld is, you know, not only the source and well of hope, but he's the source and well of wisdom. And what escapes in what he has said is that even in that very well documented process, the many layers and levels, a lot of facts have been lost. A lot of facts have been lost, and you wanted to correct rightly. Because again, the complexity is just unbelievable at so many different levels to get to a solution to success. And the naysayers, the people who want to undermine, who want to disrupt, who want to jettison, they have very powerful cards in their hands all the way, including beyond the end game. Because making an agreement is very, very difficult, but implementing and making it sustainable is the hardest part, actually, if you go around the world. So again, what I would say is that when you ask me where's the hope is that a person like Dr. Yair has not given up after 50 years. So if he doesn't give up, then none of us have the luxury of giving up. And there are many Palestinians who have not given up. Now, truth is also, you know, it's a truism. It's always said, truth is the first casualty of conflict. But you've got to understand that. And that's why you've got to interrogate the information that you're being given, always. Ultimately, though, it comes down to people. And wherever you go in the world, you find the same catalogue of people everywhere. Find bad people, you find good people, you find neutral people. I suppose what I have witnessed also is the truism that there's a lot of activism at the two ends of the spectrum. So the people who are bent on bad things, negativity, division, and so on and so forth, they're very active. And then there's people on the other end of the spectrum, like Dr. Hirschfeld, Yair, who are equally active. They never give up. In the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, the bleakest of the bleak situations, they don't give up. Okay,
but John, I'm sorry, I opened with my question and very wide umbrella so that, you know, but a little bit more concrete maybe to say, okay, who should now in Gaza, according to you, be responsible also to distribute aid? Because there was a lot of controversy around UNRWA in the world, in Gaza itself. You worked in this organization. Would you think it needs to be restructured, it needs to be dismantled? Who should come in? Who are the forces that you would entrust now with at least helping the civilians in Gaza?
Well, for my 5 years with UNRWA, the most important thing that we had as our mission was the education of 250,000 children. And the responsibility was, what are they being taught in school that is protecting them from an environment which is influencing them very negatively. And we took that responsibility very seriously, not just those of us who were the officials of UNRWA, but the community as well, because they know what their children are exposed to, and they have choices to make. So, yes, one of the problems in this conflict has been that UNRWA has been discredited, and again, on a non-factual basis, because the allegations that are made against the organization have yet to be proven. So there's been investigations. open investigations, invitation for evidence to be provided. There's real risks, of course, when you have 14 or 15,000 people, that you have some people in the organization that betray you. The head of UNRWA, to try to demonstrate how zero tolerant he is to any violations, he fired them on the basis of allegations. And yet that wasn't good enough. Show me some other organization where you will fire people on the basis of allegations rather than evidence. And many months later, the evidence is still waiting to be presented in terms of conclusive whatever for those people that have been fired. And yet all the talk is, can UNRWA be trusted? UNRWA is again part of the international effort that has been there for over 70 years. And of course, it is the target, and understandably so, of lots of criticism and allegations and so forth. Fine. Let them be answered. Let them be answered. But in the meantime, if you take away that instrument, what are you left with? I'll tell you what you're left with. You're left with the situation we have in Al-Shabaab land of Somalia, where we have no influence over the education of the children. The situation that we now have in Afghanistan, where we have no influence over the education of children. And how is that going to be a society that will be a partner for peace with Israel in the future? These are the stakes. This is what is now unfolding. And of course, can we not, in this century right now, can we not conduct humanitarian operations to the standards that we proclaim and profess, while also conducting conflict? This is the one place right now on the planet where we are failing to the degree that we are failing. Because again, collectively, and I'm not about pointing the fingers, but the bottom line is the children of Gaza are not getting the food that they need. We saw polio breaking out. The squalor that people are living in, it's not acceptable. And again, this is our failure. And as Yair said, there's plenty of fingers to point. But you ask, where does the hope come from? I keep coming back to the fact that right now, 7 ministers in the Palestinian Authority, they volunteered to join a politically neutral technical government. They're not affiliated to any of the political parties, and all the other members of the Palestinian government likewise. A number of those ministers were living in Gaza for the first months of the war. Many of them I know personally over the years. Decent people. And they've had all of their property destroyed. They have gone to Ramallah, not for vengeance, but actually to work with people like Yair, because they know what the consequence of, as Jackson said, the failure of a political peace process. Everybody and everything gets destroyed. So if they are in Ramallah, ready, willing, and capable, then we need to get behind them. We need to get behind people on the Israeli side, like Yair and others. And we have no luxury to give up hope, because in the worst moments of every conflict, people get tired of conflict. In my own country, that was the catalyst for change. Mothers came out onto the streets of Northern Ireland and said, that's enough. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much, John. Because we don't have so much time, I would now ask you to go to tell us, I don't want to point fingers at anyone, but please, we want to hear your opinions, your questions to any of the panelists.